I apologize if it's loud in my background. I'm actually at the airport en route to ASCRS. I'd like to introduce Dr. Rob Anderson, who's offered to give us a CBD primer this morning, and I mean Competency by Design education primer on the transition to competency-based education, which will take place starting in July of this year for our department. Dr. Anderson is an anesthesiologist and critical care physician at Health Sciences North in Sudbury. He initially completed his medical training at McMaster and his residency at Queen's. And he's got a very lengthy CV with respect to education. He's a former program director, a CBD lead, and he currently oversees all the academic elements of NOSM residency program. So he's certainly got a tremendous amount of experience in this space. And I look forward to the primer that he'll be able to provide us this morning. It's called CBD 101. So Rob, without further ado, the stage is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And thanks for having me. I will I'm gonna do my best here. I was describing earlier that I'm in Thunder Bay currently in a hotel, and I happen to be sitting beside an air conditioner I can't figure out how to turn off. So if I'm shaking and shivering, it's not nerves, although I do get nervous, as I said, around ophthalmology. But it's mostly, oh, it just turned off. Fantastic. So it's mostly that the room is about 5 degrees. I'm really privileged to be able to talk to you about competency-based education, and I'm going to start some slides. The reality is this talk is for you. So I am going to pause early in the talk to just get a check-in about what's important for you. There's all sorts of messaging around competence by design, and I stole these slides from about 15 different talks that I've done. The majority of those talks started with, this is why we're making this change. I took a lot of that stuff out because we're kind of past that. We're doing this. And, you know, I think what's really going to be valuable, and hopefully what I can add for you, is how can we slow the change? How can we give you some tips and strategies that our groups over the years have used to try and implement various aspects to good effect, and where I see some things going in the future, because there are some revisions to competency-based education that the college is embarking on as well. Let me see if I can start my slides. But I want to make sure that I hit the mark for you. So I am going to pause at various different times. Let me see. Do you see my slides, or do you see my notes?
Slides? No, you're not in presenter mode yet.
I'm not in presenter mode. Uh-oh. What do you see at all? Just me smiling?
Oh, sorry. You are screen sharing, but your PowerPoint is not running a slideshow yet.
Oh, I'm sharing the wrong thing then. Let's see.
I think you just had to show presenter. You have to go on the presenter on the bottom right of your PowerPoint.
Yeah, I have 30 PowerPoints open. I was sharing the wrong one. Is this the one?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
there we go. Good. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. So I have a bunch of different roles, including diehard Maple Leafs fan, so I am struggling a little bit after last night. I am an anesthesiologist intensivist in Sudbury, and so I interact with ophthalmology infrequently, but in important situations like trauma, fungemia, and when I get to do a cataract list, which was my first list as a staff, which I didn't do a single one as a resident. And so I was actually really nervous. I wasn't nervous about my cardiac list, and I wasn't nervous about the thoracics list that week, but I was nervous about cataracts. I also have a position at the Royal College as a clinician educator, where I work with the team around competency-based education and workplace-based assessment, or documenting observations in particular. I have a few other roles. I was program director for the anesthesia program for about a decade. In the time frame when competency-based education started, so I was on all the committees at the college at that time. So I went through being one of the first groups to go through this, and it wasn't smooth. And one of the messages that I think is really important in any change project is that it won't be smooth. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to meet all of your goals all at the very, very beginning, and that's okay. We're all just going to try and be better every day as we go through, and this is a change project. What I was hoping to cover today, but I'm happy to speed up and slow down or change tack depending on what's really valuable for you, is there's 5 core components of CBME, and we are going to talk a little bit about what the difference between the 4-letter acronym and the 3-letter acronym are. I'm going to talk about competence by design, or CBD. Yeah, as I said, some change strategies and how you can take competence by design from good to great. I do receive a stipend for my role at the Royal College, and my position now is Associate Dean for PGME. Obviously, that's a position that I hold that are both influential in my feelings and what I'm going to present to you around competency-based education. At times, those two are actually in opposition. There's times when I have to come to myself and advocate for resources for competence by design. And so I think I have some conflicts of interest, but I have a few of them, and they all sort of map around this issue in various different ways. I do want to pause and reflect on where I am currently and what my roles are. And this is our institutional statement of reflection around the land and truth and reconciliation. I'm not going to read it. I'm currently in Thunder Bay on the Fort William First Nation. But it really makes me reflect about 2 things. Number one is the purpose of competency-based education is to do better. It's not just to do the same thing that we were doing before with a bunch of new forms. It's about doing better. And one of those opportunities to do better is to look at what weren't we doing well before. And there are populations that we miss, and there's strategies to work with them that we don't capitalize on. And this is an opportunity to value that. The second thing is ophthalmology is really, really underserved in the North here. And so if nothing else, you guys now know my name and my contact information, and we can work together on strategies to help bring ophthalmologists to the North. And hopefully that would be another big win that we could take away from today. I'm going to pause for a check-in, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. For you guys, what's important? What do you want to hear about? What are you worried about? What excites you about competency-based education? And I love that when people are in the room, we can I can do scan and land, where you make eye contact and just hold eye contact, or you can do the 7-second pause, which is no one will let you ask a question, and then have silence for 7 seconds. So somebody would put their hand up. But I just want to get a sense of what scares you, what excites you about competency-based education. I don't know if people in the room can actually wave. Nothing, it's just like, yeah, that's fine. We'll just go ahead. The residents all excited about it? Yeah. 7 seconds. I counted it in my head.
So Rob, I'll share a question. I think sure. One of the common concerns I think many folks have is just around is it going to be a lot of paperwork? Is it going to be very demanding in terms of daily evaluation? That's something that comes up frequently in conversation.
Yeah. And I'm gonna give a primer on that, and that is that if you bolt competency-based education onto the side of a currently full residency program, it will be too much work. And that was never the intention. And so that's where lots of programs have struggled, is that they don't delete stuff and replace it with something different, right? And so this is an opportunity, and we'll talk a little bit about that for sure. But yeah, that's a risk for sure. And in the room?
I guess it's like for residents, it's just like like we're accustomed to a system of like we're being evaluated per rotation, per things, and it's just like I think mostly just like afraid of a change, like things like do we have to do like I see like the internal medicine resident, they have EPAs sometimes, and then they're really worried about it, how to get it, how to have it approved, and sometimes like the workplace is different, so it's just a new concept that we're not used to.
Okay. it's a really great question. It's probably the most critical question that we're facing as we look forward with competence by design. And I am going to talk a little bit about that. And it's change. And part of change is you have to do something different. And so there are some different things, and you will have EPAs. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about EPAs beyond just assessment. And I'm going to challenge some of the ways that we phrase things that you're going to hear really commonly, like people have to go get an EPA, go get an EPA, go get this EPA filled out, those sorts of things. We're going to change some of the wording a little bit because I think it misses the value of what we're trying to do, which is really around curriculum and training and teaching, more so than it is about assessment. And then there's examples would help. New words and concepts by I will do my best to give you some examples as well, for sure. Okay, I'm going to switch back to some slides. I think I'm probably going to be, I get the sense I'm going to try and hit the mark here. I think I got the right slide deck, I think. So if there's other stuff, feel free to put it in the chat. And if I can't see it, somebody will sort of flag it. And if you have questions, you can just put your hand up or just start talking. Let's see. So this is a big change. It's actually one of the biggest changes in medical education in 100 years. And you're going to see this slide anytime somebody talks about competence by design. And I'm going to say it's changed that wording a little bit. It's the biggest proposed change. Change management is about actually people doing things differently. It's not about changing paperwork. And so what we're really trying to do is change what programs do and how residents interface with those programs. And so this is the biggest change project in medical education in 100 years. And one of the things that constantly is questioned is, why are we doing this? Is this good? Is our old system so broken that we need to do something different? And the reality is our old system isn't broken. We have great ophthalmologists, we have great anesthesiologists. We have a really good system, but we do need to modernize it. And there's a lot of baggage that we've collected over the years. And there are various different things that are pressing us to do better. Workplace work hour reform, things like that pressure the efficiency of our teaching, and the learning environment efforts pressure the way that we teach. And there's lots of opportunities for us to do better. And this is a strategy to try and do better. And it's not just about postgraduate education. So the Future of Medical Education in Canada project is actually about undergrad, postgrad, and often into practice. And all of those major projects run by the AFMC identify competency-based education as one of their pillars of the future of medical education in Canada. And the idea that you'll see this sort of T-steeping approach, or this slide a fair bit, is that what my experience was as a resident, and what many people's experience was that you did a bunch of blocks, you spent time on those blocks. As long as things weren't terrible, you just continued along. And that because you spend some time on those blocks without actually a disaster happening, then you must be competent. And the reality is that's probably not true. It also meant that when I met with my program director as a PGY2, he said, "You're doing pretty good as a PGY2." And I was heartbroken because I wanted to be doing pretty good for a PGY3. But I didn't know what any of that meant. All I knew was I had existed in the residency program for 2 years, and there were nobody who was particularly mad at me. So I must be on the right track. And those are some areas that we need to do better. However, there is a thing about, I like tea, and tea does need to be steeped. There is a thing about doing the work and being there and seeing some of the subtleties that are not going to be captured in a new assessment framework. And so we don't want to throw the idea of time out. Time's a resource that we use to try and get people to experience the broad scope of our practice and learn all of the aspects of our practice and build an identity as an ophthalmologist or as an anesthesiologist or intensivist. Competency-based medical education is actually what we're talking about. So this is a move away from time-based, which is block-based or clinical rotation-based, into an outcomes-based approach to design, where we're actually looking at things and like skills and abilities that people can do, activities of the specialty that they can do, and scaffolding our training around those as opposed to the blocks where we think they should exist. And it's used all over the world. Competence by Design, or CBD, is the change management project. Okay, this is the Royal College's brand of competency-based education. So CBME is the thing. CBD is the Royal College's version. We actually have two versions of competency-based medical education in Canada. CCC is the College of Family Physicians version, and it's different. They hold all of the same principles that I'm about to talk about, but they're two different brands. So you can think of them like colas. There is Pepsi Cola, there's Coca-Cola, there's RC Cola. This is RC Cola. Has the same sort of basic principles, but is also integrated in. One thing that's really good about Competence by Design is that it's actually defined as a transformative change initiative. It's actually much more than just the product of a series of EPAs or anything like that. It's organized in stages, and this is the Wi-Fi symbol or the extended Wi-Fi symbol that you'll see sometimes when this is described. And residency is in the middle portion of this, but it's actually, this is Competence by Design, which includes transition to residency, or sorry, entry to residency, all the way out to transition out of practice. And so this is something that was intended very much to be all the way through our career. And the idea being that if we change how we learn and how we continue to grow as physicians, we'll be impacting patient care predominantly out in practice. And the first myth I want to bust is that CBME is a list of EPAs. And you're going to hear it specifically in internal medicine. So I'm so glad that you brought it up. Internal medicine has a series of EPAs that they're really struggling with, and they're struggling with it across the country. And they're not alone. There's lots that are struggling with them. But the workflow of them trying to observe and do all of these EPAs is really, really challenging. And so that becomes the central focus of their activities. And so that's something that we do need to do better on, is helping with them, that change aspect of the project. But an EPA is an entrustable professional activity, if you haven't heard that three-letter acronym before. And the reality is it's not. CBME is not just a list of EPAs. CBME is really 5 core components, and there's a paper by Van Mel, 2019, that really describes this nicely. So they took 25 international leaders in the world of competency-based medical education and did a modified Delphi approach and got almost near perfect alignment on what are these core components. And I actually really like this graphic. It's a bit confusing the first time you look at it, but in the central part, there's 2 of the core components in that sort of dark green circle, which is that there's a competency framework and that there's also progressive sequencing. So that's in our sort of locus of control. That's the stuff we write and describe. And then in the bigger circle, there's 3 other ones. So programmatic assessment, tailored learning experiences, and competency-focused instruction. So only one of those is the list of EPAs. There's 5 core components. So the first one is this competency framework, which is that competency that are written around the profile of what you think somebody should be able to do. And the competency framework is really required to articulate where people are going. And what are those items that an ophthalmologist does need to be able to do when they graduate. Those competencies need to be organized along a continuum so that as learners go through that, they're always in that sort of stretch area where they're reaching for something to grow. And they aren't just sort of marinating in one area. You're actually looking at trying to develop along your continuum so that those competencies are then sequenced along a developmental continuum. And this is really what that first series of workshops around developing EPAs does. So there are EPAs, or entrustable professional activities, in transition to discipline, which is the first stage that residents will come into ophthalmology. And so there'll be a series of EPAs in there that are around level setting. This is what it means to train as an ophthalmologist. This is what we expect a medical student to be able to do. This is what, this is a transition to becoming a resident. Then there's the foundations. Surgical foundations fits into this. But it's also, I think for you guys, there's some core EPAs around like sight-threatening emergencies, things that are really critical for residents to know as a foundation of the specialty. The core of the specialty, again, builds on those previous competencies with almost everything you're going to need to know to be a practicing ophthalmologist. And then that transition is around implementing it with autonomy and the other aspects of becoming an ophthalmologist. The part in the lighter circle is a little bit more challenging. And so this is where we've got tailoring our learning experiences. So this is a change aspect that we need to think about, so that we're looking at the learning environment, and that the learning environment takes place in a setting where learners can see these competencies, they can get to do them. It's a supportive environment, but that those learning experiences really facilitate the development of the competencies. So there may be some tinkering in how learners interface with patients and what learning sites and how your program is designed. One of the challenges that we also run into is around competency-focused instructions. So as an anesthesiologist who loves respiratory physiology, when residents come and work with me, that's what I teach. That's my thing. I love talking about it. I love doing that. That's about me. One of the mindset changes around competency-based education is that we actually need to know where they're at, and actually where they are on their continuum, what competencies are they working on, and we're trying to teach towards those competencies. And then the last one is around assessment. And this is like the gun at a gunfight. It's the thing that people don't forget about. It's the thing that they will always remember and align with competency-based education. But this is the assessment program. These are that we have practices that support the development and acquisition of competencies, and we're going to talk about workplace-based assessment along those lines. But it's really a systematic approach to that sort of decision-making. So when I think about coming back to this, there's this work that you guys have already done as a specialty, which is writing this competency framework and doing all the sequencing. And that was a ton of work. That was a big gulp of work. There is another bunch of work, which is around implementing it in the workplace and implementing it within each of their programs. And I'm going to tell you, that's a bigger amount of work. That is stuff that we need to lean into. It's not going to just happen. One of my new favorite quotes is this one: "We give more agency to our educational and interventions than they deserve. There's no intervention that can survive faculty that don't get it and students that are just trying to survive us." And I'd almost drop the us right now, especially around things like COVID-19. When people are just trying to survive, this was actually written about problem-based learning. It was quoted again around flipped classrooms. And you can use it for competency-based education too. If people don't do it, then you didn't change anything. It's not the initiative, it's the change aspect. And we do really need to lean into that change aspect of competency-based education so that we do something different, so we do see the value out of it. But that means there's three components to that. One is the educational initiative that we're going to describe. Two is faculty and faculty development and supporting faculty. And if we need to change how we work as faculty, if that's important. And in surgery and anesthesia, we don't really need to change that much to do this. We already do a lot of direct observation and those sorts of things. Other specialties, yeah, this is a big change. And so how do we support faculty in that kind of change aspect? And then the third one is students. If students are overworked, overburdened, and exhausted, it's really tough to get excited about this. If their sole focus is on trying to get EPAs and the sort of EPA Hunger Games, they're missing the point of this. And if you can't show up with a growth mindset where you're looking to, you're wrong every day and you're just trying to be a little bit better every day, a little less wrong tomorrow, then this isn't going to work. And so this is where, the challenge is and what we're working towards. So if I was you thinking about where I would want to put my energy early in this transition, I would focus on these two things. The first is workplace-based assessment and starting to do this work really well. And the second is competence committees. That's the secret sauce of competency-based education. Competence committees are amazing. And that's speaking as a program director who absolutely loved having the transition from being the sole person, filling out evaluations and sitting down with people to having comprehensive, thoughtful feedback and just group decision-making processes that a competence committee brings. So workplace-based assessment lives in a program of assessment. And we currently think about our assessments along this lines. There were no problems today, so things were probably okay. There were no red flags. And if there were red flags, learners are like, oh, somebody gave me a 3 out of 5. That's a really big problem. I'm a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5 person. And it's about flags. It's not about growth. And so that's currently how we think. And then we often write our feedback as, it was pleasant in the operating room, good work. You could read some more. All things that are fairly unhelpful in a developmental strategy. But there's a different way to think about assessment. And when we think about entrustable professional activities, and by the way, if you write entrustable in Word, it will underline it because I don't actually think it's a word. So I don't know, it's some made up word that this group of people have come up with, but entrustable professional activities are essentially like a group of competencies that you are authentic to the work that you do and make sense to go, would I trust this person to go do this independently? So my son is 17. My son drives, he's got his own driver's license now, and I do trust him to go take the car and actually go off with his friends. That competency or that activity, that activity is something that means that he understands how a car works. He understands the rules of the road. There's a whole professionalism and responsibility piece around me lending him my car. And there's all of these things that come into the simple act of me willing to toss him the keys and saying, you're good to go. And when we think about entrustable professional activities, it's actually giving a lot of credit to that activity. And we do that as faculty every day. There's stuff that we go, yeah, you're good. You can go do this on my behalf. And that's the sort of essence of a entrustable professional activity. So it's a key task of the discipline that somebody needs to be able to perform. You'll also hear the term milestones. Those are the abilities, those are sort of underneath a entrustable professional activity. Those are more descriptive. They're usually a single competency, like they'd be a communicator type competency, those sorts of things. These are the abilities that they would have to exhibit within that stage of development. We don't focus a lot on milestones. They're very much a developmental, as we build our EPAs and our required training experiences and things like that. And they're helpful for faculty and as we talk in a minute about how we do assessment in the real world, in understanding what they're watching for, in describing what this activity is. But the actual assessment of an entrustable, underneath an entrustable professional activity label, is more about that holistic assessment of whether I trust this person to do this independently, and then thinking about why or why not, and being able to give feedback about that. So another example about an EPA is folding fitted sheets. So if I had to pick one EPA that I was going to use to assess whether or not somebody could fold laundry, it would be fitted sheets. If you can fold fitted sheets, you can probably fold towels. You can probably fold pants. I don't need to assess all of the things. Yes, you need to be able to do all of the things, but if you can fold fitted sheets and I watch you fold fitted sheets, you're actually probably good to fold laundry. But that also presumes one other thing, is that you folded a whole lot of laundry. There is a T-steeping approach to this. And what we can't get into is you only need to fold fitted sheets. You do need to fold a whole bunch of towels. You need to fold all sorts of laundry. But I want to watch you fold fitted sheets, because that's the one that I think is where people fall down. That's the place where people struggle. And so when we write EPAs, we often think about what are really critical activities, what are activities that residents tend to struggle with that are really central to our discipline that we need to make sure that we watch them do. I just love that little GIF, so that's why I put that one in. So an EPA observation form will look a little bit different from specialty to specialty, but there's a couple of core things that are in them. And the two main things, well, I'm going to say three. So one is that there's the title of the EPA. Underneath the title, there's something usually that's around key features and milestones. And those are descriptors to say, what do we mean when we say this? So those are just almost for information. Yes, there's some checkboxes that can go along with that, but they're really globally for information. So we have a common mental model about what we're doing. There's also an entrustability scale. And so the entrustability scale is at the bottom here that we tend to use. And it's not a scale of 1 to 5. You don't get a 5 on this. You don't get a 3 on this. What this was based on this observation of this activity today on, Friday. I had to prompt you when you were doing that activity. That's okay. I had to prompt you. You're PGY2 and we're doing something really complicated. That's fine. You did really well. But I did need to prompt you. That's okay. I needed to be there just in case. I didn't do anything, but there's some things we need to talk about. I don't totally want to try, like I'll sit in the driver's side or in the passenger side and we'll go with you, but I'm not really ready to just throw you the keys. All the way up to I didn't need to be there. Now, I will say, I've had a lot of conversations with people about filling out I didn't need to be there. You can't fill out I didn't need to be there if you weren't there. You need to actually, as a faculty member, you need to watch it. You can't just go, oh, I didn't need to be there because I wasn't there and things seemed okay. That's not the intent of these, right? The intent of these would be that the resident would come to you with a form and say, hey, here's the thing I'm working on today. Can you watch me do this on, let's pick a patient, the third patient. And that would be the one you would then have a common mental model beforehand. Then you'd watch the interaction and you would rate them and also give them some specific feedback in the narrative comment box. So the two core pieces around the assessment are that there's an entrustability scale and that there are narrative comments. And the narrative comments we're really, really trying to elevate because that's where the gold is in these. Oh, there we go. So where do these live? So this was our anesthesia program when I took over and started to do competency-based education. And if competency-based education does nothing else other than help you take all the crap out of your garage, put it on your lawn, and figure out what you want to keep and what you want to throw out, then great. That's a good thing because our programs collect all of these different types of assessments, 360s and SIM assessments and OSCEs and written exams. And lots of them we want to keep and lots of them we want to throw out. And the idea of a program of assessment is that there are multiple different tools and they function differently. Documented observations or things that would fall under an EPA folder is a workplace-based assessment. It's an authentic watching people do the work and giving them feedback on that. Simulation has a different space. Scholarship projects has a different space. So does multi-source feedback and written exams. They all have their home. We don't throw them all out. But what the idea of a program of assessment is that they all serve a purpose. They're staged, that they are deliberately placed within the program at key moments. And so the goal is to then clean your garage out and go, what do we throw? If you're going to put new things in, you got to throw some things out so that it isn't a bolt on to your program. And so one of our pieces around what you're going to do in this next phase of transition is reflecting about your program of assessment and going, well, what can we get rid of so that this isn't all about the EPA Hunger Games and people trying, or Pokemon Go, about trying to just run around and get EPAs. We know where each of our assessments are and we know what's important. A little bit about how we do documenting observations. So you can see on the left here, we have my colleague who's actually watching, and he's got a clipboard, and that clipboard actually has the EPA on it. And so he's watching the activity of this resident, and then he's going to rate them. And then that information goes into a folder that is labeled as an EPA. And that folder is going to be opened up later by a competence committee, but he doesn't need to do that. He doesn't need to say whether this is a pass or a fail in EPA. They're just talking about what happened today. But what he's going to do is he's going to watch with intention. So he's going to watch, not just experience the encounter, the clinical encounter with the resident. He's actually watching 4 particular things. It's going to provide narrative comments at coach. I'm going to give you 2 tips around that, and rate with the entrustability scale. And that's it. There's 3 pieces to this, and that's all you need to do. And there's all sorts of IT support that's out there to try and help you do that at the bedside. There's various different interfaces that we use. But at the end of the day, this is to be done really at the bedside in the moment as best you can. Improving the quality of feedback is really hard. It's probably the hardest thing that we've run into. There's nobody who thought that rewriting how we do daily evaluation forms was going to change the quality of feedback immediately. That's not reasonable. That wasn't the barrier. It wasn't that the form wasn't very good. That's why residents weren't getting the amount of feedback that they had hoped. The reality is that we need to be able to make it easier for people and clearer what good is. So this is what I've asked of our faculty, which is 2 sentences. This is what you did today that led me to rate you here on the entrustability scale. The why I gave you the score that I did. And then the second one is something along the lines of, next time you could do this and that would improve your performance because. And that's about future thinking. That's moving from an A to an A+. That might be you're an A+, and next time do this again. Those are some of the most valuable conversations. You did this amazing. Don't ever change that. That was awesome. That will solidify that behavior for a resident as they sort of explore their different strategies really, really nicely. Or you know what, this was a C. This is how you get to a B. And Shirley Shipper in Saskatchewan identified 5 terms. And if nothing else, if you can remember any one of these terms in your narrative feedback, it will take feedback and turn it better. Next time, try, consider, suggest, and ideally, if you can put the word because in, that's awesome. And that moves feedback to good or great feedback. I'm going to switch gears and talk about competence committees. Again, if you have questions, I'm happy to pause and at any time. But I do want to make sure that I cover this next piece because I think it's another important change. So a competence committee is different than an evaluation committee. An evaluation committee is looks at for flags and evaluations, deals with remediations, those kinds of things. A competence committee is a different body. It's a body that is a group of physicians or a group of individuals that work together to look at patterns of performance. How do we synthesize them and understand them and provide feedback to the resident, make decisions around where they are on their trajectory, recommend promotion or changes in their status to the RPC. They're a subcommittee of the RPC. They don't make those decisions. The RPC is the governing body of your residency program. The competence committee does all of the synthesis and understanding pieces. And in smaller programs, there's a lot of overlap of individuals. In bigger programs, there might not be as much overlap. But certainly in my programs, there's a lot of overlap between those committees. But functionally, the competence committee reports to the RPC. They do lots of things, as I described, making sense of data. They identify issues within the curriculum and assessment, and actually can help with quality improvement of residency programs. They have a different lens on the residency program, and we should be empowering them to give that feedback into the quality improvement narrative of our program. But centrally to that, and what was originally described, was that they make judgments. And I think that's true. They do make judgments, But actually, I'm going to change that a little bit, is that they should be thinking about a developmental model, because not all residents need a judgment around their progression. Then not everybody's going to be moving from core to transition to practice, but every resident who's being reviewed should have some feedback about their performance and some thoughtful synthesis of the data that's being collected. There is a lot more data being collected. And so one of the value adds of a competence committee is the ability to put that together. And the flow of work with that is that ultimately there's a bunch of planning that happens in advance with the competence committee chair about how your competence committee is going to work. But there's a bunch of phases. So there's aggregation of data. So this is just collecting it in those folders. This is your faculty, your resident, your program administrator. There's some IT support that will probably be involved in actually aggregating data, but understanding but realize that within aggregation, there's no understanding. There's no synthesis, there's no pruning. It's just putting all of the stuff together under labels. The second phase is synthesis, and this is the first time we're actually going to put it together into a coherent thought. And that's where a primary file reviewer does that. And that's some work that happens in advance of a competence committee meeting. And they take all of this and they read the narrative comments and they go, okay, so where is this person on their learning curve? And it's okay if they didn't do well on, or didn't, I didn't need to be there on an evaluation first or early in their training. We want to see those. We want to see those early. We want to plot out a learning curve and embrace those ones. And so when we see like 5 in a row that they got that near the end, fantastic. That's great information. But we want to understand the data, and that's a different piece. This is something new where we actually have somebody synthesizing that data and looking really in depth. That primary file reviewer brings that to the competence committee and they present it, and the competence committee discusses it. And we embrace divergent opinions. So we embrace different interpretations of the data. We want to share as much of the data as we can with the competence committee, understanding that there's no time to sit and go have the competence committee go through all of the data for all of the residents. But we do want to be able to dive into places where there are some more questions. And then the competence committee makes a decision around progression and graduation. They'll recommend modifications to training plans or learning plans for all of the residents. And then we need to communicate that back to the residents. This was a shocking thing to me. So when we first started doing this, we were like, this is going to be amazing. We're going to give a whole bunch of feedback to residents, even the ones who are doing really, really well. Just let's give them a whole bunch of feedback. So we wrote them this letter. So they got a letter from the program director with a whole bunch of feedback of things that they could be doing differently. And I had 3 people in my office crying because they thought that meant that they were doing really poorly. I'm like, no, this is a gift. This is a place where you can grow. And this is one of the things in this change process towards a growth mindset that we do need to embrace that it is change for learners. This is something new. And so it's now okay. That initial change was hard, but it's now okay. And people actually really look to this to help guide their training. We do need to attend to how competence committees make decisions. So this is group decision making, and our society is actually arranged around group decision making. That's how our government works. It's how boards of big corporations work. It's how juries work. It's really, really common. We know that groups can make better decisions than individuals, but they don't by definition make better decisions than individuals. We need to attend a group function in order to make sure that they do better. And so we do know that given the same set of facts, 2 different groups will come to a different decision depending on pressures, biases, and processes. And so one of the things I think you can do is really dive into competence committee functioning, and there's lots of resources around this, and I'm going to share one of them, to think about how you're going to work together as a competence committee. And there's some big topics around that. So some of those considerations are, how do you set up the composition of your committee? How do you ensure there's appropriate diversity on your committee of thought, diversity of experiences, and so that we can embrace these divergent opinions and understand them better? What is the orientation of our group? Is this a group that's looking for flags, or is this a group that's looking for opportunities for growth? And We may have to orient our group at the beginning every single time. Group function is important. We all want to work together. And so you might have a very pro-social group. Problem with a pro-social group is that they care so much about not rocking the boat because the group relations are so positive that a divergent opinion may not be so welcome. So the efforts, though, to embrace divergent opinions might lead to an adversarial type situation, and we don't want that either. So we want to sort of find some place within the two extremes to try and balance where we are, and understand that's going to change over time. Timing, how long meetings last is important. Sequencing of who you're going to review is important. The person you review first is going to have more time and thought and energy put forward to them. The person who you're doing last probably doesn't. And often we'll spend more time working with learners who need more energy on competence committees, and those folks who are doing okay get put to the end. And I think we need to recognize that and move, have deliberate times where we bring those people forward and say, everybody should deserve the benefit of our energy and thinking through how we can provide some support. How do you make decisions? Is it going to be based on data solely or data and judgment? How do you share information? It's a ton of information. If you give somebody a ton of information, they're not going to look at any of it. If you give somebody a dashboard that when you have 5 observations that are staged or were scored at, I didn't need to be there, and that turns green and starts flashing green, you're not going to dive into that envelope and look at the narrative comments because it's already told you it's fine, but you don't know that it's fine. So how we present data actually can influence the decisions that we make. And so we want to make sure that we're thoughtful about doing that. And again, the idea that the two extremes are a problem. We need to find that middle place, that happy middle. The last one I point out is around leadership. And I know you have a competence committee chair, and I'm sure they're going to be excellent. And from our group, I was our initial competency committee chair. I was working at the college. I was the program director. I was the only person interested in competency-based education. And the reality is I shouldn't be in that role as competence committee chair because people just deferred to me. And so I quickly moved out of that position because I had too much influence. I was still on the competence committee, but we needed someone to actually chair this that actually could chair it as opposed to just try and get their way. And I'm a talker. And so you do have to attend to leadership and power structures within competence committees. You could try this. You can take a picture of this and it will pop up with some resources. And if you're the competence committee chair and you haven't seen these already, I apologize because these are awesome and you should use these. These are designed cases for competence committees to work through that have challenges. They have lots of problems like incomplete data and all the sort of things that you think, oh, well, what about this? There's probably a case that is in there that will help guide you through working through those discussions. So I think there's about 8 of them. There'll probably be some more. They're awesome. I take no credit for them other than to show you a little symbol that somebody else made and put on the computer for me. And the last thing I'm going to point out is that there is a push for competence by design 2.0, and you're going to hear about that. And the big push for competence by design 2.0 is that there are specialties that are really struggling. There are specialties that this is amazing. Competence by design has been awesome for them. There are ones that are struggling. And I'm going to suggest that it's probably not the educational initiative, but it's that transition to that outside circle of what is your normal workflow? How much you need to change your workflow? What are those other pressures? We implemented this in the middle of COVID-19 for several specialties, and everybody's done. Nobody wants to do this right now. And so it's been really hard for some specialties. There are some that this is working really, really well. And so the college is very attentive to that, and they want to change and they want a better support. And we've been leaning into things like lots of town halls and webinars, and those are great. But those tend to be the people who are already okay and are already really invested. to show up to those sorts of things because they're okay. So they have space to learn. We need to do better at those programs that are struggling a bit and help support them in the space where they are. And so recognize that is happening. You're going to hear about that. I don't see that there's going to be massive transformation to the core competencies or anything like that, or the core components of competence by design. The things we just talked about that around workplace-based assessment and competence committees, those will be there. That's the change. So none of the work is going to be a problem that you're doing, but we do want to do better so that so people experience this better, and we actually going to see the benefit that we do know is there. If you're looking for more resources, there are tons and tons of resources. This 45 minutes is not enough to know how to do competence by design. This is going to be a decade-long change process. The Royal College, if you just Google competence by design, Royal College resources, it'll take you to a website that actually has tons of resources around competency-based medical education. So with that, I'm going to stop. Hopefully I've hit on a number of things that are valuable to you. I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Dr. Anderson, for your comprehensive presentation. Anyone on the call, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll keep a watch for that. I guess I'll start. Can you, from your experience with various launches, tell us some strategies for engaging faculty at the different stages of launch?
So I think you need to attend to change management as a process. And so for me, one of the things that's been really important is the elevator pitch, is understanding how to sell this to someone in a way, like it's a great product, but how to tell them in a way that it's valuable to them. And an elevator pitch isn't about you, and it's not about the program. It's about them, what matters to them. And so for frontline faculty, evaluation forms suck. It's work. I don't want to do this. It just adds to my day. And honestly, most residents don't care about my feedback anyways. Well, it might be because your feedback's not very good, right? And it might be, and so one of the ways to frame that is to say, you know, with the transition to competency-based education, you don't need to rate them on a 1 to 5. It's an authentic kind of thing. Did you trust them to do this? If not, whatever. You just write it in. It's a low stakes kind of thing. And you just give them some feedback about what they're going to do better. But you know what you don't need to do today is you don't need to tell them whether they passed or failed. You never need to say that. That's a decision that competence committee is going to make. What all I need from you is to watch them do an activity that's important to them in their roadmap and give them some feedback on it. And so understanding it's a sort of Wolf of Wall Street, sell me this pen. Don't talk about the pen. Don't tell me why I want to sell you this pen. Tell them, find out what matters to them and then frame the change in what matters to them. Does that help?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, I don't see
There's
any.
a hand in the room.
Oh, sorry. Is that Austin?
Hi, Dr. Anderson. It's Prem here. I'm one of the R2s. Thanks so much for the very informative talk. Just wanted to ask, so with this new curriculum, do we go to a preceptor and say, like you said, just to make sure I understand, hi, I have an EPA here. Can you fill it out for me? So it doesn't come as a surprise. And if so, if we have time to prepare for it and we know what we need to do in advance, does that affect the feedback we get? Because just for example, I don't know, something we learned early on is for narrow angles, making a hole through the iris. Fairly straightforward procedure, but making sure you remember all the steps before and then going to your preceptor. If you go to them with something that you prepared for, then maybe you'll probably do better than if it was a surprise. But of course, we also don't want surprises. How do you account for that preparation when reviewing? Yeah.
Great question. It's the reason why we're doing this. And what you've described is essentially the idea of a growth mindset. I don't think of feedback as an object that you ball up at, you know, like a piece of paper you ball up and you hurl at someone and they either take it or you know, don't take it well. You know, that's not what feedback is. Feedback's a process. And it's a process by which you make sense of data and you apply it for change. And so if you come in, if I have a resident who comes to me and says, hey, Rob, nobody calls me Dr. Anderson. Hey, Rob, this is what I'm working on. This is where I've struggled in the past. If you could watch me do this and give me some feedback on it, I'd really appreciate it. That'd be gold. That'd be amazing. Could you imagine if every day you got 5 years of your training, you got one piece of advice that was that valuable that somebody watched what you were looking for them to watch and gave you feedback on that? That's really the optimal situation. Within an EPA, there's also some descriptors to say these are the things that we think you should be able to do as part of this EPA, which is awesome because you show up with some descriptors of what you should do before you've even done your first one, which means your first one isn't at entry level. You actually already know a whole bunch of stuff around this. But then the question is, what do you do with that information next? So feedback that doesn't create any action isn't really feedback, right? If I give you some advice about something, it's simply advice. Feedback happens when you start to make change on it. And so coming with that mindset of this is a place I want change will actually make that feedback better. The other thing you said, though, was something around surprises. There are some EPAs that are around surprises. So how do you deal with those? They weren't planned ones. You're going to need to find strategies for that. How do I deal with an emergency? It's not like, oh, you know what? A bull put his horn through someone's eyeball, and now I need to deal with, like, I didn't have an EPA in my pocket ready for that. But how do we can talk about that sort of stuff after, but you'll need to think through some strategies on how you deal with these ones that maybe are for surprises. But the premise is very similar. Dr. Chu?
Hi, thank you very much, Dr. Anderson. That was a great presentation. It really, I really learned a lot. I have a quick question for you just on the competence committee. Ideally, the competence committee should probably be separate from the RPC. Is that correct? The members of the competence committee?
If you can, although they need to be expert. And I don't know how big your group is. None of my groups are that big. So they just need to know this is a different task. So we've got, you can actually think through a competence committee in multiple different ways. You could have a member of the community as long as they have been trained to be a competence committee member and that they know. You ideally want people with multiple divergent opinions or different experiences. We have frontline faculty members, we have community faculty members, we have academic-y type folks, we have people who are more about understanding remediation. You could have someone there who is from a human rights lens, who has a lot of expertise there. There's all sorts of different individuals that you can bring to a competence committee to bring those divergent opinions. Understanding that the decision-making body for high-stakes decisions remains the RPC. If your RPC and your competence committee are the exact same people, yes, it still works, but it's a little less authentic in that you probably did make the decision at the competence committee. All of that, though, is still a move forward from your current situation, which is that your program director probably makes those decisions. And then brings them to the RPC. So it adds a thoughtful understanding piece that we didn't have before. And when people complain about competence by design, they don't complain about competence committees. I don't hear anybody complain about competence committees. They're all like, oh yeah, no, competence committees works, but CBD doesn't work. And I'm like, whoa, that's what CBD is. You're actually talking about the secret sauce. So there are multiple moving pieces with this. So but I think, yeah, from a composition point of view, you need to think about that and go, you know what, if we always agree, we probably don't have the right composition on our competence committee because we should have divergent opinions.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Rob, for joining us. We really appreciate your valuable insights. We are at 8:30 now, so I think we'll call it a day. I hope everyone has a great day. Great jersey.
Yeah, I'm gonna get ready for the rest of my talks for the day. So
All right. Take
All
care,
right.
everyone. Have a good day. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.